your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live broadcast on your favorite football updates channel. It's 12 minutes past the hour of 11 p.m. that we do come to you live from Kampala, Uganda. I wish to say thank you to all our new subscribers, those that are part of the community. Thank you so much for choosing to be part of us. Um, I wish to applaud those that were part of our morning broadcast as well as last night's broadcast. Thank you so much for dedicating the time to be part of our respective engagements. And I wish to recommend that you go over to the channel and watch the two videos we did release today in the morning and in the late evening, discussing about what Uganda needs to be ready for AFCON, as well as East Africa. We get to chat about Vipers. And then in the other part, we talk about Michael Carrick is possibly getting the Manchester United job, and then whether Arsenal can withstand the pressure that they do have in their path on route or en route to try and win the Premier League title for the first time in 22 years. So far, they've not done anything to convince us that they are capable of withstanding that pressure, because twice they've capitulated under that sort of pressure. We saw them a falter against Brentford in a 1-1 draw, but also more importantly, yesterday as they dropped or they squandered a 2-0 lead to share the spoils with the bottom side in Wolverhampton Wanderers, as something that has further reaffirmed what many have always thought about Arsenal, that they're incapable, that they do not have the mental fortitude to carry them through and things like that. So we're going to be discussing that alongside what's to come, of course, in the Premier League over the weekend, because there's going to be another huge, amount of responsibility on the Gunners, because they do head in a North London derby, one of the most fixtures you'll find, against the Tottenham Hotspur side, who have a new manager that need that new manager buzz, a team that has been well rested for the last I don't know how many days, more than 12 days really. So because their last game came midway the other week, because over the weekend they did not have a game against they were not involved in the FA Cup. They did not have a midweek game. Really, Arsenal had all those responsibilities to take care of. So, and we're going to also discuss Mikel Arteta's sort of inclination or lack of desired changes or desirable changes in as far as the team is concerned and things like that. So really, do join us for this evening's discussion and we'll get right to it. But before we get into the evening's discussion, forget not that the UEFA Europa League is ongoing. There were earlier games played, including a surprise result for me as Nottingham Forest beat up against Fenerbahce by 3-0. I did not get the chance to watch that game. I've only seen the result, perhaps as many of you may have done so. But yeah, it is quite a brilliant start for Vitor Pereira, who has taken over the reins over there at the City Stadium until the end of the season. For those of you that are just joining us, welcome back to the Football Tribe UG channel, or welcome to the Football Tribe UG channel. If it's your first time here, please consider liking the broadcast, but also subscribing to the channel if it's your first time here. Gidi Luca says hi. I hope I'm pronouncing your name the right way, but I think I'll call you Luca. Hi, Luca. How are you doing? Where are you joining us from? What time is it? What city? Guys, let me know where you're joining us from. I'll be reading your comments. I'll be responding to your questions. For those of you that may have any, as we go through this broadcast. But like I said, those will be the main topics of our conversation. It's a football channel. I come to you live from Kampala, Uganda. That's where I'm, streaming live from. And oh, wow, beautiful goal there. Beautiful goal. Celtic going behind in their game already against Stuttgart. Stuttgart have scored to get the lead against Celtic. Like I said, for me, a bit of a surprise result, thanks to goals by Murillo, Igor Jesus, and Morgan Gibbs-White, as Vitor Pereira kicked off to a winning start with his Nottingham Forest side. Remember, I think he signed, is it a year and a half contract, with Nottingham Forest, so, but yeah, Plum, hi Plum, is that how you pronounce your name, Plum or Paul? Paul or Pom? some some English, like I said the other time, English words or names often have letters that ought not to be pronounced while you're reading a name or a word. But where are you joining us from? It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I hope you're doing well. So really, yes, is the man I'm looking for here. So, anyways, it's been a flying start for him. Vitor Pereira there. Then of course earlier on, Bologna beat up against Brann by 1-0. Dinamo Zagreb lost to Genk by 3-1. While Celta Vigo beat up against PAOK by 2-1 as we speak. Celtic under the charges of Martin O'Neill, formerly at Aston Villa. For those of you that remember back in the days, a 0-0 behind against VfB Stuttgart, while Lille and French Var, with Crvena Zvezda is scoreless, as is Ludogorets against French Varos. Panathinaikos 1-0 behind against Victoria Pilsen. Anyways, so the Premier League match day 27 gets underway over the weekend, and like I said, there's going to be a whole lot of responsibility to be borne on the shoulders of the respective teams, depending on what their aspirations and pursuits are. For those that are pushing, for the top four, for those that want to finish within the the European places, that's Europa League, Conference League, and those battling against relegation, those that still have aspirations of winning the Premier League title, and things like that. So really, you ought to remember that. It's been a bit of an odd season. At least that's what I feel. And this has nothing to do with Arsenal being at the summit of the table, but the level of inconsistency that we've had with multiple teams is what sort of tells you what you need to know. We're talking about an Arsenal side who, in the last 7-8 games, they've only won a handful. They've lost one. They've had as many as 4 draws now, and it's not looking pretty for them. It's not looking pretty. And if you're an Arsenal fan, you must be worried. Some have already given up the hope that they will win the Premier League title. So the question we do pose tonight is that, do you think Arsenal still have a chance? Do you think they still have a chance at winning the Premier League title? The easy answer for that is yes. For those of you that care to remember, just a couple of days back, actually, following their 1-1 draw against Brentford, I did a video that we put out on the channel, and you guys can go and make reference to it and watch it. And I said Arsenal will be the reason they do not win the Premier League title, because the destiny is in their own hands. And at the time, they are still 6 points ahead. As we speak, they are 5 points ahead of Manchester City, who Man City have a game in hand, and you do assume, possibly as they can really, if they go ahead and win that game, it reduces the deficit to only mere 2 points, and and those mere 2 points can still be squandered at any given opportunity. Like I said, we're going to the weekend when Arsenal have a huge amount of responsibility on their shoulders to carry for the Super Sunday late kickoff a bit away to Tottenham Hotspur. We know it's a team that has not won much at home, and when you look at their home form, it's a concern. But this is a derby, and in a derby is the kind of game that trumps form. It's a kind of game that trumps quality over players on either side, and then you have a well-contested fixture. And it doesn't promise to be any less than that, regardless of what Tottenham may have in their locker room in terms of injuries and things like that. So for me, it's a very interesting debate or discussion to have in the context of the Gunners, as well as Man City, who are the chasing pack in this particular case, with Man City breathing down their necks. It is Jurgen Klopp that said, if it is Man City chasing you down when you're leading the table in a Premier League title race, they are like wild dogs. Celtic have scored to restore parity, and it's 1-1. It's 1-1. So you look at it in that context or in that respect, and you can't help but wonder, because first of all, Man City have I wouldn't say they have an easy assignment, but they come up against a team that they've already beaten up against twice this season, by 2-0 at St. James's Park and by 3-1, I think, in the return leg of the semi-finals of the Carabao Cup. And never mind that they lost to the same side in the first leg, I think, of the Premier League when they lost by 2-1. That was Man City. Should have been, earlier on in the season at St. James's Park. But if anything, I do not remember, and I stand to be corrected, the last time Newcastle went away to Manchester City and even picked up a point. I would struggle to remember that, because in the last two visits, in one occasion, they've been thrashed by 4-0. I've just told you about the EFL Cup that they got beat up against. And then you ought to remember the other time was a 1-0 victory. That was in August 2023. So this is not the best version of Manchester City that we've seen or that we've come to know of. But they're a kind of team that have given themselves a chance in the pursuit of glory, because all they needed to do is keep up in pace with Arsenal, and they've done that. For all their inefficiencies that you may accuse or hold against them, just pretty much as you can hold it against Arsenal for not creating a healthy distance between them and their chasers, is that they've stayed within relative marginal distance. Because I've already said, even when it was at 7 points, that the Torres, for if you're in Man City's shoes, it was still wide open, that any team could drop points at any time. But while we make that assessment of Man City and critique Arsenal for everything that they've done and not done in terms of winning and dropping points, we must remember that what is happened to Arsenal can still happen to Manchester City. We're talking about the Man City side that have already lost 5 Premier League games this season, are losing to teams like Tottenham, losing to teams like Brighton, are losing to teams like Manchester United. I don't remember who the other losses came up against, but those are some of the teams that they've lost. Losing against Newcastle, those are some of the games that they've lost. And unfortunately for Arsenal, you cannot bank or bet your chips on Man City dropping points or on Man City's opponents outperforming Man City, that then you gain the advantage. That's not the way to go about a Premier League title. They did not do themselves absolutely any favors when they dropped points against Wolverhampton Wanderers. And perhaps the 2-0 lead was quite flattering, because their performance was nonetheless still lacking, in my opinion, especially how they go forward and how they create chances, or very few chances, sometimes almost none, because I've seen Arsenal go a spell in multiple games where their first real attempt on goal is come after they have our mark. So when you go back to yesterday, they score a goal in the 50th minute, and the next goal or the next real attempt or cause of trouble for against Wolves is in the second half. And that sort of disparity, they do not create a moment or the feel of, we are here to kill our opponent, we are here for the jugular. That's not what the kind of feel they give you. It's not the kind of feel they give you. It's far from that. They do not make it relentless for the opponent. I feel they give the opponent so much room and laxity for the opponent to self-correct if they are falling short in any department. And basically that's what we had of yesterday. So whereas Manchester City, and by the way, Man City themselves have had their blip in form, but when you look at the last 5 games, they've won 3 of those, drawn 1 and lost 1. I think that loss coming against Man United, which we can't really hold, we know the context of that. But then they went on to win their game against Wolverhampton Wanderers. They drew against Tottenham, won their subsequent game against Liverpool, and most recently against Fulham, as one would expect. But yet, in sheer comparison, after losing to Man United, Arsenal on the other side, one against Leeds, one against Sunderland, and have since dropped points against Brentford and Wolverhampton Wanderers. 2 sides that you'd assume that for any title pursuing team or that is serious about winning the Premier League title, they should be winning that game, and particularly the game against Wolverhampton Wanderers, because that's where they looked. Let's not forget, they looked very poor in the game against Brentford, and perhaps their result yesterday was only a result of the symptoms that we had seen in their inefficiencies against Brentford. But I would want to imagine and assume that's the extension or of what we saw in their poor performance against Brentford, because they were lucky to get away with even point in that particular game. Now, like I said, they are a team playing under pressure. Now, we know that winning Premier League titles, we know that winning silverware comes with all sorts of pressures. It comes with enormous pressure, especially when you are, one, expected to win, two, when you desperately want to win, three, when you've shown signs that you want to win, and now you've built the earlier point of expectation. Because had Arsenal not put themselves in the conversation, then we wouldn't be having the discussion. If there had been a surprise package of some sort of the season, we wouldn't be having that discussion. You remember why we did not over-criticize them back in the 2022-2023 Premier League campaign when they finished second, 5 points behind Manchester City? It's because at the start of the season, nobody had expected them to be in that sort of position. And yet, but when it came to the subsequent season and the season after that, that's 2023-2024, we criticized them for finishing 2 points behind Man City because they capitulated once again. When you go back to last season, when they finished 10 points behind the eventual champions in Liverpool, we criticized them because then they had built the expectation that they are going to compete, that they are there to compete. And this season, for the better part of the season, they have been at the summit of the Premier League table. And, the rest have been reduced to a chasing pack. I do not remember the last time Arsenal had slipped to second place. It may not be too far back or too close, but either way, they've somehow refused, one, two, failed almost deliberately to create that healthy gap. I do not know if they want to win it the hard way, if they go on to win. Oh, it's goal number 2 for Stuttgart. I mean, what a poor piece of defending from Celtic there. How do you let a player hit the ball that low inside your own box? And Kasper Schmeichel could not really come to the rescue of his side. So for me, that's the interesting debate, or that's the interesting conversation, that the result we saw yesterday was symptomatic, or the result we saw yesterday was an extension of Arsenal's poor performance from the Brentford game. I don't know if it's doubt that creeps in for them to think to themselves, every time we get to this part of the season, we collapse. And by that extension, because the funny thing about this Arsenal side is usually it's not the final 5 games of the season. It's the 10 games prior to the final 5 games of the season. That's where they squander it. That's where they get beat left, right, and center. There's somebody who said by the time we get to February, Arsenal will have been out of all the pursuit of all 4 titles. Now, that's not the case. But what is happening in the Premier League is only evident of what they've been through over the years. How many times have we seen them over the years get knocked out of the EFL Cup in February, the FA Cup, and the UEFA Champions League? You remember all those times they would meet Bayern Munich. At one time it was Monaco. On another occasion it was Olympiacos. Go back to the days when they met AC Milan. I mean, they just kept getting knocked out at the same level, usually the round of 16. Only that present day you do not have the round of 16 has now to come in March because of the new version of the league. Of the UEFA Champions League. Otherwise, ordinarily, you'd be having the round of 16 at this, usually in this month. And whereas we are waiting to find out who Arsenal's opponent will be, and we eagerly wait for that, we do not know. We cannot guarantee, while they've looked as favorites, going on to win 8 games, I've never put them number 1 in my favorites to win the UEFA Champions League title. Why? Because they've never done it before, So I have no basis to say that no matter how good they look on the pitch, they are outright favorites to win it, Especially ahead of teams with pedigree like Real Madrid, ahead of teams like Bayern Munich, teams that know how to get the job done when it comes to that stage, that level. When you have a Barcelona still in there competing, even though I do not believe PSG will go ahead to win it, they won it last season. So in any case, as reigning champions, they merit perhaps winning it more than Arsenal in terms of expectations, in that sort of sense. You still have a Chelsea in there, you still have a Liverpool in there, all teams with better pedigree than Arsenal when it comes to winning the UEFA Champions League. When it comes to the Carabao Cup final, they are up against their Premier League title rival in Manchester City. And every time it's mattered the most that Arsenal have needed to beat Man City, they've not always gotten the job done. I think it's only on 2 occasions that I seem to remember them getting the job done. Prior to the start of, I think, last season, they beat, not last season, prior to the start of the 2023-2024 campaign, I think. Yes, prior to the start of that season, they beat Man City in the Community Shield. Maybe it mattered then. And then in Mikel Arteta's first half season, it mattered the most at the semi-finals of the FA Cup. They beat Man City to knock them out. So, but when it's come to the Premier League, when it's mattered the most, you go back to that goalless draw in the 2023-2024 season when they needed to win there to, really, really press down on winning the Premier League title. They set out for a goalless draw. Last season, with 10 men, they played it out with 2-2 draw. You go back to this season in a 1-1 draw at the Emirates Stadium when they needed to win. They needed to win because if you're going to win, you ought to beat up against the big boys and then scare off the ones that come after that. So they dropped points in that one as well. So really, whereas the jury is out there, this sort of trend of form that they are having in the Premier League, building towards that cup final, and I understand we're almost 1 month away from it, but it doesn't send you the kind of message that gives you confidence about this Arsenal side that they will go ahead and beat up against Man City. Now, Man City themselves have their inefficiencies, including having very poor second halves in many games in recent times, beyond the game against Liverpool. But they do a job good enough in the first half that your concerns or your reservations about them in the second half are made to look less important, So Man City and also because we cannot discuss Arsenal and not discuss Man City because Man City are the chasing pack. We know that they have the experience of Pep Guardiola. When it comes to winning the Premier League title, even though that squad is changed a great deal and a lot of players have not won it. You have players like in there, like Nico O'Reilly, that have won it. Players like Jeremy Doku was part of the title-winning side for the 2023-2024 Premier League season. You have players like John Stones, Ruben Diaz, Bernardo Silva, Rodrigo Hernandez Cascante, Matthias Nunes, Mateo Kovacic, Brad Erling Haaland, I think Phil Foden, yes. So you have as many as 10 players who have been part of the title-winning side that know how to get the job done, that know how to sort of sustain the pressure of winning a Premier League title. In sharp contrast, on the other side for the Arsenal, I think they only have one player that has won a Premier League medal, and that is Gabriel Jesus. All of the others have not won it. Kai Havertz only won the UEFA Champions League with Chelsea. You look at all these others. David Raya has never won it. Ben White has never won it. William Saliba, Gabriel Magalhaes, Ricardo Carafiori, Piero Hincap has a bit of experience winning a league title because he won one with Bayer Leverkusen. We cannot fault him for being in his debut campaign in the Premier League. Martin Zubimendi, with all his experience, has never won a league title from coming in from Real Sociedad. Declan Rice, with all his experience, has only won the UEFA Conference League and he's never won a league title. And then you have, You have a Christian Nogard. He's never won it. A player who I never understand why Mikel Arteta cannot use in the Premier League. It's more like I can't even explain it. I can't tell you what. I can't tell you why. The cause of it. And then in the forward lines, you have Victor Gyökeres, who's won league titles over there in Sporting Lisbon, and but it's also his debut season in the Premier League. So You look at the Noni Madueke, the Bukayo Saka, the Gabriel Martinelli. None of them has the experience of winning a Premier League title or a league title for that sake. So when it comes to winning a league title, you only have about Piero Hincapi, you have Gabriel Jesus, you have Victor Gyökeres. Those are the players with experience of winning a league title. All the others, none. And when it comes to a Premier League title, it's only one player in that squad. Then you have a manager who has never won it, has only been an assistant for part of a winning side. And therefore, that does not qualify for his own experience of guiding a team through it, because when you're an assistant, the pressure is always on your top boss, and for 3 consecutive seasons, he's shown us that he's inexperienced and that he is trying to build that experience, but you only build that experience by getting it over the line. Is he going to succeed on the 4th time of asking, or is he going to capitulate once again? Because so far, it doesn't look like he's succeeding. It looks like he's collapsing under pressure. And I said in the aftermath of yesterday's game that if you're Mikel Arteta, I don't know how you speak to those players. I do not know how they speak to you, because one, whatever they do, okay, not whatever they do, but most of the things they do on the pitch are a reflection of you, because they are there to execute your instructions. So, and when it comes to this critical stage, one, you expect your manager to find solutions, but for as long as they fail on finding those solutions, then the doubts begin creeping into the minds of these players that have come so close and still fail to win it. Those same doubts creeping into the minds of players who think maybe he doesn't know how to help us win this team, because they know they have the quality within the squad. They know that they can beat up against any team in the Premier League, and yet somehow they have not succeeded at doing it, or they have not done it. John Abiero says hi. Hi, John Abiero. Where are you joining us from, John? So really, it's quite an interesting conversation to have when it comes to Mikel Arteta. When you look at his coaching staff as well, whereas they have coaching experience, I do not, and even for Gabriel Hens, I think his experience is winning it as a player, and perhaps that gives us a plus. But again, you could see his own frustration with those players. They have this thing that Arsenal do, that for as long as they are leading, no matter how slim a lead is, they think they can play it. They think they can play it safe. They think they can. The game management has been so poor. When Man City found themselves in similar positions, they would pass you into boredom. Arsenal no longer do that. Yesterday, I saw them concede possession like it was the fun thing to do. They could not pass the ball to keep it. They squandered it. They panicked. And that panic only boils to one thing: pressure. The manager looked on, almost in disbelief of his own team, and he watched them collapse. But may I put a significant amount of blame on him because of some of the changes that he makes? It's like he's come to this realization. He has a bit of cram work of, I have to withdraw that player for that one. Victor Gyökeres for Gabriel Jesus. But every time they've withdrawn Victor Gyökeres, when they have a slim margin, they've suffered for it, because he helps them keep defenders at bay. And I do not know who has told him that he and Gabriel Jesus cannot play in the same team. I think they can play in the same team. You have a very dynamic player in Gabriel Jesus who can play on the right, on the left, and behind the striker. You have that. And then knowing that you do not have Kai Havertz, and then you feel that you need to withdraw one for the other, then you have Bukayo Saka, who is returning from injury, who you send to play as a 10 to be your playmaker, and has hardly created any chance besides scoring for himself, and is not the first player you withdraw. But instead, you just withdraw Noni Madueke. Minutes later, Saka has an injury scare, and then you're forced to withdraw him. Sometimes, I watch a football game, and I question the decisions that managers make on the touchline, given the kind of substitutions they make. In my opinion, they know better. In my opinion, they are supposed to know better. In my opinion, they are expected to know better. But how many times have they made decisions and we questioned them, and we were right to question them because eventually they did not work out? Almost as soon as you say it, it comes to life. And I'm thinking to myself, for all your experience, you who is the boss and me who isn't, how come that you could not see what I have seen? How many games have we seen that Arsenal needed to see out and they needed a player like Christian Noga to come on and he never brought him on? How many times? I saw it against Sunderland. I saw it yesterday against Wolverhampton Wanderers. I saw it against Brentford, that he needed him on the pitch. I mean, he's going to play against his former side, for goodness sake. But he still said, nah, I won't bring him on. Like I said, I do not know what's between those two and Premier League titles. In any case, if we were to ask ourselves, how many Premier League games has Christian Noga played for the Arsenal? I kid you not, there must be very few. There must be very few, you know. There must be very few. There must be very few. Let me find out how many games he's played for Arsenal, because it's quite critical that we find out, you know, in terms of Premier League appearances. We need to find his stats, you know. In the Premier League, in the Premier League, he's only featured in 4 matches. You can imagine. And how many of those games has he been a starter? I do not believe he's been a starter in any. And Mikel Arteta is the kind of manager that wants to play his players into injury or run them into the ground. Now, I'm being too critical or perhaps too harsh on him on that front, because he's done better rotating his players this season out. But look at a player like Ben White. He's available to help to start a game. And somehow, Jurriën Timber, who is literally played every serious game there is, be it in the UEFA Champions League, be it in the EFL Cup and the Premier League, is a player that starts. Sometimes you just need that breath of fresh legs. We saw him rotate Gabriel Magalhaes over the weekend, just like much he needed, because William Saliba was only returning from, a minor injury or an illness that he had gotten a bit of a rest. Look at that midfield of Martin Zubimendi and Declan Rice. Both players have been literally played tired. You could see the fatigue on both players' faces, and yet he still thinks he can't start Christian Noga in a Premier League game, So, and I'm asking myself, what's the purpose of buying a squad player like him? So, in other words, until Zubimendi and Declan Rice get injured, both at the same time, will we ever get to see Christian Noga in that midfield? Because for those of you that remember, even when Declan Rice was absent, when he played Martin Zubimendi, he played him alongside Mikel Merino. And that's not a criticism against Mikel Arteta for making that kind of selection. But the point I'm trying to make, that he's never choosing him. And I would want to know why. It's a question I've posed in different forums, and I'm here to get an answer. John says, yesterday I saw Arsenal players gave a room for Wolves to play and press them back. Then it looks only 10 minutes for home team to equalize. Again, exactly, because in modern football, the best way of defending is by attacking. Instead of keeping the pressure on Wolves, they sort of retreat back and invite the pressure on themselves. We saw it against Sunderland. We saw it against Brentford. And we saw it against Wolverhampton Wanderers. We saw it against Man United. We saw it against what was the other game? I'm trying to remember. We saw it against Liverpool in the second half. Never mind that Liverpool never scored in that game, So we've seen it multiple times where you expect Arsenal to be on the front foot, for them to retreat back, and then suddenly they go apeshit. You remember even against Wolves in the first leg, they score a goal, And of course, it was an own goal, but they take that lead. And then in the later stages of the game, they retreat back. And then boom, Awos create a chance. It's a header for Arokodare, and bang, it's 1-1. Had they had only been lucky enough that they created a chance that culminated into an own goal by Mosquera, that they went on to win that game, by 2 own goals. So you're right, and I certainly agree with you that they have a tendency, and I cannot, because when something happens for the first time, it's a mistake. When it happens for the second time, it's a coincidence. When it happens the third time, it's a pattern. It becomes a routine. So, for example, I've always made reference to Barcelona. When Barcelona play with a high line, it's not a one game off. That's just how Hansi Flick sets up his team. That they play with a high line and set an offside trap. If you beat it, you're smart, you're good. But they'll never change that. So it's their mode of operation. The same way you would not be surprised when Real Madrid score a counter-attacking goal, because there are teams that play under quick transitions, There you're not surprised. You're not surprised if Brentford score a set-piece goal, because it's one of their trademarks, So I would want to understand why that is the case, why the manager cannot move away from that sort of tactic, My favorite live streamer is here. A man full of wisdom, love, kindness, and open-mindedness. The only Madrid fan I like, one of my closest friends, a most genuine, kind people ever. Good evening, Mr. Tribe. Thank you so much, Pedri, there, / Joshi Boy. I don't know why of all names you chose the name Joshi Boy. Maybe it could be is it your real name? Maybe Josh is your real name, Joshua. But then the other day, was it the other day or in the morning, you are wishing people Ramadan Kareem in a manner that almost alluded to an idea that you could be a Muslim. So, but whichever the case is. So, I want somebody to help me understand why Mikel Arteta is still hell-bent on that sort of trademark of operating, that you let your team invite pressure on themselves. You let team, that you cannot keep the ball higher than pitch, that you cannot pass teams into boredom, into frustration, and force them to be committing errors, force them to be committing all sorts of fouls that then delay the game, You say, it's not my name, I just picked a random name. Okay. Okay, that's all good. So really, I would want to understand. I will help you understand. He's playing haram ball, but luckily it's Ramadan. Now he can't play it anymore. I saw that joke somewhere that that even Allah doesn't like haram ball. So indeed it is haram. Because, if Arsenal had a history of scoring very few goals, we wouldn't be up in arms. If they did not have a history of that fluid attacking football, we would not be up in arms. And for me, the challenge is, I've seen Mikel Arteta play attacking football, fluid football before. And the question is, yes, he's learned that fluid football could not win them a Premier League title. But how many times has he needed to retreat back to that kind of football? And he hasn't, because the best thing about management or a best manager is about striking a bit of a balance, not in the same game, but knowing when you need what style for what game, and in terms of fluid football against what opponents, and being conservative against what games, So we cannot wait to see it for every once in a while, because I can perhaps read you a handful of games that I've seen Arsenal be very fluid in a Premier League game this season. Versus Nottingham Forest in the first leg, 3-0. Versus Leeds United, home and away. Versus Sunderland, they looked a bit more fluid. That's in the Premier League alone. Versus Tottenham in the first leg. Excuse me. Those are the only games I can point to. In all the other games, they've looked conservative, they look cautious, they play with a lot of caution. You know how you go to driving school and you're learning to drive, and you have your instructor telling you to proceed with caution. And that's why the car it has that branding of instant brakes, so that whenever you need, so it's like Arsenal are learning how to drive. That they're driving with lots of caution, and as soon as there is an instinctive, even if presumed danger, they can hit the brakes on the first time of asking. That's what it's felt like. Okay. Just says, so essentially Arsenal and its fans are stupid, Mr. Tribe, apart from you, because some fans were blaming the wind for their draw yesterday. like I've said before, Pedri, I've watched a reasonable amount of football, particularly as an Arsenal fan, for me to come to put away the emotions out of it and try and understand why a team is not performing the way it should perform. And once you get to that level, of course, as a fan, innately, it will hurt you that maybe you've lost a game, that you've dropped points, that in a game that you should be winning and all that. But as soon as you put that to the side and understand the game in the broader context, and forget the idea of a fan who says perhaps if the manager brings team A and it loses, it should have been brought B, because for me, even when it's the same players, but how they behave, the execution is also been evident of that, So it's not like we are demanding for a change of playing staff, because sometimes teams lose and you're like, get rid of that player, put him out of the team for some time. Over the last couple of games, that's not been the case. It's not been the question. It's how those players that are deemed right behave when they're on the pitch. Then Josh says, for the last 3 games, I have not seen the Arsenal set-piece coach standing, or hence what is not going on. I mean, Nicolas Jova yesterday was as frustrated as anybody else. And he was beaming with fire or anger when Arsenal conceded that second goal. First of all, and I do not blame this on Ricardo Carafiori, I did not think he needed Ricardo Carafiori on the pitch when he comes on for Leandro Trossard. As soon as Trossard walks off, I'm thinking, now is the time to bring on Christian Nogard as a last-minute draw. And maybe bringing on Christian Nogard wouldn't have saved the moment in terms of the goal, because one would say that was fate, that was destined, and game was bound to end that way, regardless of what he did. But I do not know. I believe the tired legs in midfield, in all these games where they've dropped points, especially from a winning position, come from, because the problems come from midfield, that they've not pressed down enough. Sometimes in addition to the attack, that they've not closed down people quickly enough, that they've given away spaces. Look at how that cross is brought in. Martin Zubimendi was trying to run towards the player that brings in the cross to close him down. But at that moment, you're tired, really. You're no longer at the same rhythm or pace. That a sort of lapse in concentration is going to be there, So that's where the fresh legs in midfield could help, because after running 80 minutes, 85, 90 minutes, that midfield pairing, you've got to swap somebody out to give the other party, who you think has a bit of extra gas, which is usually Declan Rice, a bit of breathing room to know that he has somebody fresher that is going to run faster than him, that is going to go a bit harder than them, You just need that. It helps, because at the end of the day, you have 2 tired legs that are going to shrug arms towards each other, So a part of me, I do agree. Okay, for me, whether the set-piece coach stands up or doesn't, whether Gabriel Hens comes to the touchline or he doesn't, whether Albert Stevenberg stands up or he doesn't, for me, may not matter much. It matters what instructions is Mikel Arteta giving players. How many? I mean, there comes a point, and when you look at it and try to dissect the game in itself, there's a time you felt Arsenal has made lesser teams feel bigger. For example, for those of you remember the game against Kairat Almaty. First of all, Kairat Almaty is one of the worst teams that you can, or weakest opponents you could ever meet in the UEFA Champions League. And yet somehow, Arsenal could only win that game by 3-2. They could only win that game by 3-2. Yes, they missed loads of chances in that game. But the manner in which they conceded their 2 goals, one being a penalty caused by Ricardo Carafiori, and the other being a lapse in concentration, was it at the back post for either Piero Hincapié or somebody who did not track, and guy gets headed to it. So really, it's only all the lapses that we've seen of Arsenal are symptomatic of a larger problem. I question myself, where has the Arsenal from the first leg and gone? A team that, in their conservativeness, they were so excellent in that conservativeness that denied opponents a shot on target. Yesterday, they played a game that everybody expected. They played in a game against an opponent who behaved in exactly anybody would have expected them to behave. And yet, they could not conjure up something different. So, if you've been able to deny teams like Liverpool a shot on target, teams like West Ham, teams like Burnley, had it not been for, Zubimendi squandering the ball in the Tottenham Hotspur game, Tottenham would have walked out of that game without a shot on goal. Why can't you do it against Wolverhampton Wanderers? This is the worst team in the Premier League this season. Anyways, John Abiero says he's from Kenya. Habari gani there. Okay, are you from Portugal? Okay, no, he's from Spain. Pedri or Josh is from Spain. Okay. So, anyways, the responsibilities Arsenal have over the weekend or this weekend, and perhaps we'll get to digest those games tomorrow with, of course, Pedri. I hope you'll be here to give us your predictions for match day 27 as we resume our prediction game. But their responsibilities will come against Tottenham Hotspur. And like I've said, for everything you may criticize of Tottenham Hotspur, for everything you may think of Igor Tudor as not being a good manager, remember it's a derby too. There's that element that a new manager tends to bring to the table. They may not always win their first game, but there's that element. There's something. There's that pep talk that gives players a bit of a lift, depending. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get to the weekend and Arsenal drop more points. I wouldn't be surprised, not one bit. Not that I'd want them to. Of course, I would want them to win. This Arsenal cannot win the UEFA Champions League. Unfortunately, they are like a lion with no nails. Well, for the UEFA Champions League, like I've said before, for me, they are one of the favorites to win it, not the ultimate. If we were to go in particular order, I wouldn't put them in the top 2. Why? Because they have no experience of winning it before, so I'm not convinced beyond reasonable doubt that they are going to win it. However, with the way teams have behaved against Arsenal in the UEFA Champions League, it's what gives me that level of belief that maybe they could have a chance. It just maybe. But also, when I watch teams like Bodo Glimt, the way they behaved, the kind of football that Bodo Glimt plays is the kind of football that you need to beat up against this Arsenal side. And I can't help it imagine that for some reason, if Arsenal were to get Bodo Glimt, let's say at the round of 16, unfortunately, they could easily be knocked out. Not because Bodo Glimt are that excellent team, but they will play the kind of football that bores the hell out of Arsenal and cause them to do points. First of all, they are very attacking in terms of going forward, but they can defend their goal quite generously, by the way. They can do that. They did it against Man City. They did it against Atletico Madrid. They did it against Inter Milan, and some of the other opponents they've come across. So where do you place Barcelona's chances? I would say Bayern Munich, I'd say Real Madrid, I'd say Arsenal, I'd say Barcelona, Liverpool are in that sort of cohort. My reservations about Barcelona is one, One, they've had troubles with injuries this season, with some of their key players. Lamine Yamal, Rafinha have been in and out of the team. I do not know when Pedri is going to return, but he's a very critical player to everything that they'll do right on a given day when you want them to be good. And then how many times have we watched a game of football for Barcelona and it's been Joan Garcia that has bailed out Barcelona? So whereas Barcelona have the pedigree, my conviction about the possibility of them winning is unfortunately shy of the other top three that I've mentioned. I would even put Arsenal ahead of Barcelona, given what I have observed of Barcelona, particularly in the Champions League, and by extension, what I've watched of them in the Spanish La Liga, where they're not too far off, because between you and I, you remember, my prediction was that they would defend the Spanish La Liga title. Arsenal can't get Bodo Glimt, Man City or Sporting CP can get Inter or Bodo, Real Madrid or Benfica. So yes, I completely understand. But the point I was trying to drive is that if you get an opponent that behaves in such a way, then you can. Imagine, for example, again, look at a team like Benfica. With knowing how Jose Mourinho behaves and how he can set up his team, he's the kind of manager that would beat up against an Arsenal side, because it's about frustrating them. First of all, you can play them to a goalless draw. Why? Because they struggle to create chances. Clear-cut chances. Oftentimes, we've seen that in the Premier League. And like I said earlier on, their games have watched Arsenal, and they did not have a shot on target until after half an hour, or even so. So the most similar club to Bordeaux is Club Brugge, in your opinion. Okay. Now, Arsenal would easily beat Club Brugge. Why? Because Brugge are similar to Barcelona. For me, that's how I see them. They are so open because they believe in that very open-ended football that's why they scored so many goals. Look at their game against Atletico Madrid yesterday. They scored 3 goals. In fact, you could say they scored 4. Unfortunately for them, one of them was an own goal. And then you go back to that game against Barcelona. You go back against in a game they beat, I think, Olympique Marseille on match day 8 by 3-0. They fancy themselves on creating lots of chances and, pushing forward. So they are very open-ended. So if they come against an Arsenal side who defensively can be very good on a given day and almost excellent, if you're going to open yourself as much as Club Brugge will open themselves, then they could get punished. They could get punished. So that's how I look at them. So again, now you see that Barcelona play with that high defensive line and that they leave themselves open. If they were to meet Arsenal, for some reason, Arsenal could struggle a bit. And the reason for that, at least I want to imagine, and this is more imaginative, given on how they behaved in certain instances, even though Barcelona is similar to Club Brugge. Remember, Barcelona are very good when it comes to keeping the ball, and they have players that like to play in tight spaces and get the better of you. In players like Lamine Yamal, in players like Rafinha, and things of that sort. If you can be dominant on the ball and you deny them the ball, then they'll struggle to create the chances in open play, and then they will want to wait for set pieces. And if you avoid giving away set pieces, then you may survive. I ate a burger. Okay, was it a cheeseburger, or is there any other? Anyway, whichever it is. So, for me, I think that's my frustration, or that's my thoughts on Arsenal, really. And then, so Aston Villa have an important game against Leeds United, but Man United have a very important game on Monday night against Everton, so we'll get to look at that perhaps on Monday. Liverpool play away to Nottingham Forest. We're talking about a side that beat them by 3-0 in the first leg. Oh, you don't like cheese? Okay. Maybe all cheese is not good cheese. I know I've just myself into eating pizza not on a number of occasions. And depending on where you get it from. I remember one time we got pizza and their cheese, I don't know if they had put too much cheese or it was the type of cheese. There's that cheese called, I think it's called mozzarella cheese, something like that. It's much better. It's much better. Anyways, so yeah, like I said, Man City's responsibility will be with Newcastle and things like that. And I want to believe that Man City will get their job done. That if Man City are going to stumble anywhere during the remainder of the season, it may not be against Newcastle. It could be against any opponent. But now that's where Arsenal have to bank that as they falter in this very odd season, that Man City too falter. That Man City too falter really. That's what I would say about that. Okay. Majority of those games have resumed for the second half with Celtic still 2-1 behind against Stuttgart, Lille 1-0 behind against Crvena Zvezda, Ludogorets and Ferencváros, that game is 1-1. Panathinaikos and Victoria Pilsen is a 1-1. Then there are also games there over there in the UEFA Conference League. Then tomorrow, Athletic Bilbao will be up against Elche. That's in the Spanish La Liga. Mainz will be up against Hamburg SV. That's in the German Bundesliga. While Sassuolo will be up against Hellas Verona. And then Brest will take on Olympique Marseille in the French League 1. So I do not know. Who is the interim manager or the new boss for Olympique Marseille? I've not heard much about that, who is replacing Roberto Di Zerbi. But yeah, Vitor Pereira will be with Nottingham Forest for a period of 18 months. So they think if he saves them from relegation, then he can continue with them next season. And we see how it goes. But Evangelos Marinakis ought to stop appointing his friends. And by the way, speaking of his friends, Edu Gaspar Dawood, very soon rather than later, he will leave, or he could leave Nottingham Forest, because it's not worked out. It's not worked out with him or for him at Nottingham Forest. And I never understood why he would ever downgrade. And maybe the other was a bigger title than the one he had at Arsenal. Why would you downgrade from Arsenal to go to Nottingham Forest? But anyway, sometimes it's you want a new challenge. But if we were to assess him if he does leave today, and we're assessing him on that new challenge, in taking on the role of head of football at Nottingham Forest, then he's really failed. I do not know. When you pass, they say you've passed with flying colors. I don't know if when you fail with dull colors, but he's terribly failed so far at it. Because it's under him that they're now having the fourth manager, and he's been part of the conversations that have appointed 3 of those, and then he's a part of the reason as why Nuno Espirito Santo was up in arms and eventually talked himself out of a job when he went on almost the attack of his boss, that's Evangelos Marinakis. Guys, please do not forget, go over to the channel and watch those videos. Please do not hesitate. Go and watch those videos. I had a discussion with the head of sport, the head of sport at Nation Media Group, and that's Spark TV, NTV, Daily Monitor, Inyanda, Dembe FM, KFM. He's the guy over there that I was having that very fruitful discussion. I will get to talk about racism in the wake of Vinicius Junior's incident. We talk about the UEFA Champions League. We talk about Arsenal. We talk about Italian football in general and things like that. And then also we get to tackle, East Africa's readiness towards hosting the AFCON 2027 ahead of next year. And we assess their readiness because he's a guy with vast experience. He's, I think, been to a good number of AFCONs. He was at the AFCON in Gabon in 2017, he in Egypt in 2019, in Ivory Coast in 2024, then in 2025 in Morocco. I do not know. I think he was also in Equatorial Guinea for, was it Equatorial Guinea or Angola back in 2013 or thereabout, 2012, 2013, because we had two quick editions there. Yeah, Angola was 2012, and I think Equatorial Guinea was 2013, possibly thereabout. I hope I've not mixed them up. So please go over to the channel and watch those videos and let me know what your thoughts are. Leave a comment down in the comment section in as far as what your thoughts are about those respective videos. So you let me know. You let me know what your thoughts are on those submissions, really. So otherwise, why don't you allow me wrap it up here? Enjoy the rest of your evening. Watch those games and see them out. I'll continue watching the passively the game between Celtic and Stuttgart and see how things go. But yeah, we'll look forward to the Premier League perhaps and dissect some of those games tomorrow. It's been a pleasure. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of the night. Until next time. Bye-bye for now.